Those of you who are here with us, welcome to another live guest interview within the Mindful Journey. So delighted that you are here today, whether you're joining in from somewhere in a morning time zone, good morning, or if you're here with us on the East Coast, good afternoon. If this is your first time joining us, again, welcome and thanks for being here. And if you've been with us for a number of these guest interviews, as always, please feel free to put any questions you have in the chat function, and then we'll try to get to them on the back end of our conversation. I'm so excited to bring you our guest today, Scott Burgess. Scott and I were introduced through a mutual friend a few years ago, and immediately upon connecting with him, I just felt a warmth and humility with which it is that he carried himself with as a person, which drew me in to believe that he epitomizes those same characteristics as a leadership perspective, from a leadership perspective. Although we won't probably be talking too much about leadership today, I do just want to share with you a brief overview of some of his bio, as many of you may have seen it on the front end. Scott currently is the CEO of David Lawrence Centers for Behavioral Health. His primary day-to-day responsibilities are providing the strategic direction for the clinical staff and professional staff and administrative staff internally, while also working in close alignment with the board of directors and overseeing what I believe are about 375 plus staff members. Is that right, Scott?
Yeah, about 400 now. Yep.
Wonderful continued growth. That's a good thing, though it is perhaps showing a more demand, which isn't a bad thing. It means that we're taking care of self. Anyways, I don't want to get too granular in his bio, but he certainly is accolade, has many of accolades, been quoted in numerous publications, and has certainly been influential in the world of mental behavioral health, both locally and throughout the nation, as he spent a period of time up in Illinois working for a mental health organization for 20 plus years. So with all of that being said, Scott, welcome. Thanks for being here and looking forward to our conversation.
Thank you for having me, Adam. I really appreciate it. The opportunity to share, and I'll enjoy our friendship and partnership, and hope that this is beneficial for those that are tuning in.
Yes, certainly. So could you give us a high-level overview of what David Lawrence Centers for Behavioral Health is and what your role as CEO primarily entails?
Sure. Yeah. So the David Lawrence Centers, we're in our 55th year as an organization here in the community. And we really started out as an organization that was intended to roll out across the country what are called community mental health centers. And back 55, 60 years ago, there was an act, a federal act that was put in place by John F. Kennedy, which was the Community Mental Health Center Act of 1963, which was intended to try to take individuals out of those yesteryear large state psychiatric hospitals and campuses, known actually by title back then as asylums, and try to get people reintegrated back into their communities. And John F. Kennedy was very passionate about this mission because he had a sister who struggled with behavioral health challenges. And he knew, like every other family member that was impacted in that regard, that the best way to care for individuals was not to send them away from their communities and their friends and their families, but rather to have services available to them right in their communities. So there was this mission to establish community mental health centers across the country. And right here in Collier County, we had a wonderful lady, Polly Keller, who was our founder and is still active with us today, 55 years later. She's an amazing individual and an advocate and a volunteer still. She really wanted to see this happen in Collier County. So we started out very humbly with a very small storefront with just 2 staff members. And now 55 years later, we've got 8 different locations. We've got about 400 staff members, and we provide 24/7, 365 care for children, adults and families that struggle with any form of behavioral health challenge. And when I say behavioral health, that really encompasses both mental health issues and substance use disorder issues. And there's a lot of folks that have co-occurring challenges. They struggle maybe a little bit with either of those or both of those, or maybe have significant challenges in both of those areas at the same time. So those are folks that we would say would have dual diagnosis. And I break down our services, and we've got over 40 programs, but I really can break them down into much more digestible terms in saying that as a 24/7 organization, we're available for crisis support at any time, whether that's walk-in or that's calling. We'll provide that support. We'll do assessment in real time. We do have inpatient units for children for mental health challenges, for substance use disorders. And then we have a detox program, which is inpatient, and we've got a 28-day program. That's more of our intensive support, acute care support services. Then we get your traditional outpatient services, individual, group, family counseling. People come, they go, have those visits. And then we do a lot of support in the community where we're working with kids and families right in their homes, or we're working with adults that have serious persistent mental illness, and we're going in and helping them with all of those issues of activities of daily living, trying to help them not only just kind of survive in the community, but really thrive in the community, getting back to work or back to school, having friendships and supports. So all of that put together, we provide about 315,000 services a year. So we're a very active organization, helping a lot of people in the community, and just feel very blessed to be part of that mission.
That's amazing, Scott. Thanks for such an in-depth overview as to the work you're doing. And there's certainly a lot to unpack there and a lot to pull from it, more than even what it is at my level of understanding has been about your work. And of course, I'm very familiar with DLC and having gotten to know you, but even prior to you. So I'd love to just learn a little bit more of the 40 programs when you talk about, just to help our listeners understand what those may look like. Are these, 12-step recovery type programs? Are they encompassing for specific needs? Or when you're talking programs, does that include, because I know you have like pet therapy and art therapy, are those considered programs, or are they something more specific relative to somebody's individual needs?
Yeah, so I really like the way that you kind of ended that sentence with individual needs, and one of the things that we talk about a lot is that whether it's a mental health challenge or a substance use disorder challenge, everybody has a unique pathway, and what works for one person might not work for another person. There's some commonalities that are evidence-based care
Hmm.
that we try to unfold and make sure that are available to individuals, and encourage them to utilize things that have been demonstrated to be very effective for many, many people. But then there's those additional types of supports that can be brought to bear to help an individual that might actually connect with them a little bit more than another type of treatment. So you mentioned things like pet therapy, and we do integrate pet therapy. We've actually, on our units, we've got the pause dogs that come in to our children's unit, our adult mental health unit, and our substance treatment units. We also integrate equine therapy, like horse therapy. We art therapy, music therapy, spiritual supports. All of those types of things can connect with a particular individual different than another individual. So I like to use the example on our inpatient unit, where we may have an adult that is struggling with, let's say, schizophrenia, a very serious formal thought disorder, and can cause people to be, nervous, paranoid, really shut themselves in and shut themselves down a little bit and not be very communicative sometimes. And boy, when those pause dogs walk on the unit, it just releases something in everybody that everybody just kind of has this just opening of their soul almost, that they can engage that way. And then once that opens up a little bit, the person may feel more comfortable to opening up more verbally and kind of sharing more information. It's the same with art therapy. It's another great example with kids that a lot of times kids are not real verbally expressive. They're not exactly sure how to say something, or maybe they're nervous to say something, or because they don't know how it's going to be received. But boy, when they do that art therapy or that artwork, we can really see inside sometimes what's going on internally. So those are some examples of how we really look at holistic care. But then you were right also in the earlier part of the messaging that you had there, that we do have distinct programs for distinct categories of individuals. So we may have a program where we're going into the home and we're working with a child and that child may have, a very significant form of depression, or they may already have a significant form of a formal thought disorder like schizophrenia or
Hmm.
a severe bipolar disorder. So we've got different kind of criteria for different levels of intensity of program, and we try to match that up the best we can to the unique individual. And so that's really kind of how it all works. And
Very
again,
cool.
we've got programs that are just for kids and adolescents, and then programs for adults. So it's just kind of all trying to determine the unique individual, their unique needs and categories of illness, and an intensity of support that's required in order for them
Mm,
to hopefully, reach the recovery as quickly as possible.
yeah, I really love those examples you shared, specifically the one with the pet therapy, because it's obviously you're seeing actual evidence of it, uh, relaxing folks who are dealing with something from a brain physiological standpoint, like schizophrenia, and to just hear from you having seen experiences where it does diffuse. Because I know many times, having grown up with dogs, there's something about if you're having a bad day, just
Yeah.
seeing your dog wagging its tail and its excitement, it can put, if nothing else, a smile on your face. So certainly quite interesting.
And that's also, another element of when we talk about holistic care, we do know that what impacts the mind impacts the body, and what impacts the body impacts
Mm,
the mind. And that's something that, for many, many years, there was this kind of artificial separation of, well, you either treat the body or you treat the mind. And what we've come to really understand is, we're one whole person, and we need to really
yes.
have an integrated model of
Hmm.
care. And that's where, we bring in some of these holistic treatment models, but then we also understand how important it is to treat the body as part of a critical element for the mind. So we do have other elements, our nutritional support or guidance that we provide people when they're on our units. We're trying to help them better understand what
Hmm.
they're putting into their body and how that's impacting not only their body, but their mind. We have some fitness supports when people are here. For example, in our 28-day program, we've got a fitness instructor that comes in, and they'll do things, just simple exercises, whether maybe it's a little bit with yoga, or it's some meditation, or it's some just
Hmm.
basic physical fitness. We do walks, regularly throughout the day. Again, it's getting sunlight, it's getting that oxygen. And when people come into our 28-day program, they're not just detoxing off of whatever their substance is. We have a no caffeine and a no nicotine policy as well.
Wow.
So oftentimes, people will say that they've struggled a lot those first maybe week or two,
Yeah.
but by that 28th day, or by, some people stay, 5 weeks, some leave it 3 weeks. When they're
Yep.
when they're ready for discharge, oftentimes they say, I haven't felt this good in body and in mind in, I can't even remember how long. So
Hmm.
it's
Hmm.
again, it's treating that whole person.
Wow, that's amazing. There's so much I could continue off of so much of what you said, but I want our listeners to hear, because I think I'll be able to get back to some of what you just mentioned. But I'd love for our listeners to hear what gave you the inspiration to get into this line of work, because candidly, from the outside, this is not easy work, right? You're in the trenches dealing with folks who are dealing with real life challenges, and with the recognition that sometimes your work may not work, and that can be frustrating. So you've been in this space for 30 plus years, if memory serves me.
Mhm.
So could you just give us an overview as to what inspired you to enter into this field and sustain in this field over the long term?
Yeah, sure. I think I've always been fascinated by the field of psychology and behavioral health. It was something that intrigued me from day one. I remember taking my first psychology class, as a senior in high school, and the more that I would read about it, and I wouldn't say that it was exactly the same for other subjects, that I felt like I wanted to really dive into it rather than repel or run away from it. But psychology just always seemed to be something that drew me in. And and then when I went into college, I thought, well, I was originally a business major, and but I kept taking these psychology classes because you had a certain number of electives, and I always figured out a way to make sure that I could get some more psychology classes in. And boy, it was just like everything I was learning felt so applicable. It really felt like it resonated from my personal experience and interacting with others, as well as how it could be beneficial. So even when I was still thinking about business, I thought, wow, there's a lot of stuff in here that you can utilize in a business
Mhm,
environment. And then it got to that like junior year, and it was like kind of the fork in the road year where you have to go one direction or you have to go another because you need to finish things out. And I just remember, saying to friends and family that I just really felt like I was being called to this work of psychology in some way, shape, or form. And I
mhm,
wasn't exactly sure what, but I just felt called that was my path. And
mhm,
so and certainly one of the biggest challenges in the field is it's not a high paying field, and I had many people that said, boy, are you really sure that's what you want to do? Because it's a
yeah.
lot. Not only is it really hard, but it's really not well funded, or an area that you're going to be able to make a reasonable, even a reasonable living. And but I just, as a person of faith in God, I just felt
Mhm,
like, God will provide, and if this is the calling, He will equip me in the process as well. And here I am, 32, 33 years later. I feel completely blessed to have been able to be in this field, impacting people. I think in significant ways. We've only seen more and more mental health challenges in our country and in our
mhm,
communities across this time. And there was a big stigma associated with mental health treatment and support
mhm,
of the past. So I think we're working our way through that. We're not
mhm.
over that hump yet, but we've made a lot of progress. So it's just, it's been something that, I just think has been consistently, kind of restored in my soul, year over
Mm,
year, that this is the right path to try to, fulfill what I believe my calling is here.
that's amazing. Well, I'm so glad you entered into this space, Scott, because the world needs people who have a genuine heart with a desire to sincerely serve, helping. Because I think that there are too many times where you see leaders, and you've probably seen it, I'm sure, even if it's not in the mental health space, where they put lip service up on the wall for a mission and a vision. And the surest way to create a disconnect and have a lack of trust in any culture and environment or relationship is when you don't do what you say you're going to do. And
Yes.
so I just in our few years getting to know each other, DLC is lucky to have you. And even though you're not sitting knees to knees with the patients or the clients, as you may call them, you're providing that direction to give your folks a space to support. So you're inherently supporting and looking forward to seeing the continued great work of DLC and what you all do. I am curious though, what from your vantage point, being immersed in the day to day, why is it that there's been such a stigma with mental health where folks resist treatment? Like if I'm going through some sort of addictive tendency, and I know I need help, why is it so tough for me to say so? What has been that barrier from your experiences? I know there's not a one size fits all approach, but just what do you think that the stigma has been derived from?
Yeah, I don't think we can fully appreciate the cultural influences associated with the level of stigma that we've kind of grown up with. And it's so, I don't want to necessarily use the word insidious, but it's pervasive, and it has come in, it's seeped in across our whole life experience. So when you watch a television show, or you have watched a movie, or some type of portrayal around mental health or substance use disorders, it's usually been a kind of a negative connotation. It's been and again, I think these portrayals are becoming more and more accurate of
Mhm,
recovery, and we're getting better about sharing some more positive messages around mental health treatment, substance use disorder, substance treatment. I think it's come a long way, and even just the last 5 years. But, thinking back to, the last, 20, 30, 40, 50 years, we are probably are one of the only conditions, healthcare conditions that people still whisper about. 40 years ago, people used to whisper about cancer. They'd whisper about other types of conditions, and now all of those are, seem to be more in the light, and people
Mhm.
willing to open up and talk about them. For the longest time, up until really very recently, people did have a shame and a guilt to share if they had a mental health struggle,
Mhm.
and the cultural influence around that. I thought it was a really interesting experience. I really will probably never forget this my entire life, but maybe 25 years ago, I had the pleasure of being, asked to be a participant in a group discussion at Loyola University in Chicago, it was facilitated by one of the professors there, who was the head of actually the criminal justice department, Dr. Lugerio. But he had a lot of expertise in criminal justice and mental health. And he
Mhm.
did this exercise where he said, and this was the days of actual chalkboard. He said, "I'm going to turn around," and he said, "and this is a guilt-free zone. Nobody's gonna have any issue, but I'm going to write down every word that you have that's associated with mental illness." And he said, "Whatever that term is, I mean, you just throw it out there." So people would say crazy and nuts and boy, you'd name it, and he couldn't even keep up. He was going so, people were throwing him out there so quickly, and he filled that chalkboard up. And then he erased that board, and he said, "We're going to do another exercise. Throw out the names associated with diabetes." And there was silence. And he threw out
Mhm.
another medical condition, and there was silence. There was no writing on the board
Mm.
associated with the connotations. And he said, "That's the stigma we're talking about. That's what
Yes.
is driving the cultural stigma that we're trying to overcome, so that people feel safe to
Mm.
open up and express their challenges so that we can help
Mhm.
them." So I thought
Mhm.
that was so profound. I don't think I'm ever going to forget that.
Yeah, it's such a powerful example, and it still appears that it is relevant today. And I agree with you that it certainly has gotten better. Social media has caused a lot of negative as it relates to mental health, but there has been some positive as it relates to mental health. In that some influencers now who have credibility in the marketplace are coming out talking about their own struggles. So I think it is becoming a little bit more normalized. And as I've probably shared with you, one of the questions I will ask you on the back end of today is very specific, because we are trying to normalize the fact that we all face challenges, and even if it's not a clinically diagnosable challenge, how you manage major moments and personal difficulties matters into how it is that you thrive or don't thrive in the world. So, anyways, I just I wanted to elaborate because one, I think that story is incredibly powerful and speaks to the stigma that's been there and what's still in existence today. But hopefully, we're finding less threatening adjectives to describe mental health today.
Right, exactly. And there really shouldn't be a shame or a stigma associated with getting, mental health care.
Hmm.
If professional care is needed and warranted, we shouldn't think about that any differently than going to see our primary care doctor if any other organ in our body seems to be having a little bit of a challenge. For
Yeah.
some reason, we just have this difference of this belief difference that
Yeah.
one part of our body should be treated differently from an acceptability of treatment standpoint. And it doesn't really make any logical sense. It just
Hmm.
has been so culturally reinforced for so long, that it's hard to break through that. But I think we really have seen that pierced significantly, especially
Mm.
with COVID. I think, COVID really opened up the dialogue,
Yeah.
because everybody was struggling in some way, shape, or form with, anxiety or some
Yeah.
levels of depression or isolation. And I think it just really brought it home that, yeah, this is something we need to be talking an awful lot more about, because it's integral into our overall wellness.
Yes. Yes. So well said. So with all the programs that DLC offers, and I know there's a number of testimonials on your site, and we'll encourage folks to check out your site, even if they're not in need of today or have family members in need of. But so many powerful testimonials, Scott, that I was able to peruse, and I think right on the front page there's a young lady who was dealing with depression and kind of having gone through your facilities, found hope again. So there's so many success stories, and I'd like to talk about those to begin with, but I also have questions for you on, what may cause relapse. But to start with the success piece, what are a few of the critical components that you and your staff have seen as being essential to allowing folks like that young woman to sustain a recovery through whatever it is that they may be going through?
Yeah. Well, I think it starts with what we were talking about, which is this openness to be actively involved in their care. Now, whether that's professional care or whether that's just them doing some of their own self-help types of things, but being open to recognizing how important it is to prioritize that. So often it's an area that we don't really think about a lot in our life as well. How am I attending to, my mental health, wellness, and well-being? And a great phrase that's been coming out the last couple of years is there's no health without mental health. And I totally agree with that. If you're struggling with your mental health, or quite frankly, even if somebody in your family member is struggling with their mental health, boy, we really it's hard for us to operationalize our lives optimally if
Hmm.
somebody's struggling with mental health. So I think it starts with being open to recognizing that that's an important priority,
Hmm.
and not to undersell that in one's life, that we really need to attend to that. And then a commitment to kind of following a plan, and having some discipline around that plan is really important as well. And again, everybody's plan may look very different. Their wellness plan, one person's wellness plan related to how they're managing their depression may look very different than another person on how they're managing their depression. But it's a commitment to trying to stick to the things that are going to help them with their unique wellness and recovery.
Hmm.
And oftentimes, that a critical element to that is having somebody that you can be honest and open with, and be accountable with. Having that support system, and again, that can be a mother, a father, it can be a coach, it can be somebody in a faith community, it can be a professional counselor. There's a lot of different types of ways to approach that. But I've really never seen a situation, I don't want to say never, but I've rarely seen maybe situations where somebody's been able to just get by in life solo.
Yeah,
And we
so
are
true.
social beings. And if we
Hmm.
don't have a social element to our life, or a friendship, collegial type of situation in our life, if we're completely isolated and completely lonely, I don't think a person can live in a healthy space in that way. So
Hmm.
that connectivity to somebody else, I think, is critically important. And there are individuals that have truly chemical, biological challenges, and that manifests itself in certain ways from a psychological, psychiatric standpoint, that do need to take medicine. And what I say
Hmm.
is, again, going right back to that whole, global healthcare, we would never say to somebody that's got diabetes, boy, you really shouldn't take that insulin, or boy, as soon as
Yeah.
you can, get off that insulin.
Mm.
Um, so, we just need to think about things a little differently that way, that because, oftentimes people will say, well, boy, okay, take that medicine for a short period of time, but get off that as quickly as you can. Well, if a person's chemistry is really such that in order for them to be at what would be kind of homeostasis, that
Hmm.
steady
Hmm.
state, they need that medicine. It shouldn't be thought of any differently than any other medicine.
That's quite interesting. Yeah, that's a whole nother. I feel like we could probably go on for an hour or longer on that,
Oh
just
yeah.
that avenue on the pharmaceuticals and so forth. And but I'll avoid that now. Maybe we'll have to have you back because I'd be intrigued to learn more about what would cause the resistance there, and then what the data shows as to folks who do sustain on the drugs, et cetera. But let
Sure.
me not get sidetracked, Scott. I appreciate you sharing that for context. And I love what you said about the connectivity, because we not only do close relationships and friendships allow us to have purpose in our life, but they allow us to bounce ideas off of, and learn, and hear how we can advance or progress or get through. So I think there's so much to be pulled from just the importance of social connection with folks who sadly may end up relapsing after, say, they go through one of your 28-day programs and they're living in a residential environment. They're surrounded by all this hope and joy. They're going through the pet therapy. I'm sure you've had experiences, of course, where folks get back into society and 6 months later they're maybe back addicted to a substance or and needing your facilities again. What are some of the things that you and your staff have identified as being some of the triggers that that put them back in that place, or disallow them to stay in sustained recovery?
Yeah, yeah, I think one of the key elements that we see, unfortunately, when people have a slip or a setback, is that they've not stayed connected with, kind of those recommended support systems. So
Hmm.
they've kind of, maybe gone back into, through themselves back into work, or maybe it was work and then it was kind of isolating. Then the stress of your daily life starts to kind of get on an individual, and sometimes they'll revert back to some of those coping strategies of the past, which aren't
Hmm.
always healthy coping strategies.
Hmm.
So again, without having connectivity to individuals that want to positively support your recovery, again, whether it's mental health or substance use disorders, it can be a slippery slope back into those challenges again. But if you have those support systems in place, that's a great opportunity for somebody to bring you, the support that can help get you over a challenge that you might be going through. They can maybe even bring you a little bit of challenge and accountability to say, boy, you sound like you're really struggling. And I know in the past when you've hit challenges like this, that you've had a tendency to utilize a substance or something of that sort, and say, I really want to encourage you, this is the time that you need to be even more connected, so let's try to get together more. So those are some of the things that we see, and if individuals aren't working, I think one of the terms that you used, and I totally agree with, is belonging, sense of belonging and purpose. And it's this, if people are not continuing to work on their sense of being, like who they are, and getting to know themselves
Hmm.
well, to be able to lead themselves well, sense of belonging, in life, and just, that overall sense of purpose. If they're
Yes.
lacking those things, I think it's easy to try to then find those things temporarily in the
Mm.
immediate sense, other places that aren't healthy. So focusing on those elements can really help in the short run, immediate, and also that long-term recovery.
Hmm. Very well said. It looks like we had I thought a question popped up, just a guest saying I couldn't agree more. Agreed as well. Um, I, and I asked this question of it, my forthcoming question here. I've asked this a few times of some guests, and I know there's no, also with it, there's no one size fits all, and certainly no magical answer that's been out there. But some more recent data has shown that 70% of global deaths are attributed to modifiable risk behaviors. We know we need to go to the gym and stop eating fast food, yet we don't do it. We know we shouldn't, use recreational drugs, yet we do it. We know we shouldn't drink, from not in a bad way, one or two a day, right? But obsessively binge drinking, but many still do it. So the challenge I think everyone is faced with is, how do you get somebody to be motivated to want to change? Walking through DLC doors, I know in some cases if they're Baker acted that they have to be there, but if it's not forced, how do we get people to want to change?
Yeah, and I think that that's such a great question, and it's an uphill fight because immediate gratification is a very strong impulse. And it also is something that, from a marketing standpoint, we're fighting against because you just turn on the television or you click on your social media, and it's going to present you time and time and time and time again, repetitively, all the things that you should want and all the things that
Mm,
if you don't have, you're going to be missing. Um,
mm,
so, so I think that that is one of the big challenges to us fighting against that strong impulse for immediate gratification, which drives a lot of the things that we're talking about. It drives, you turn on the TV and you see all these commercials about alcohol and oh, everybody's having a great time. Well, I'm not feeling that good, but boy, there's an association that gets built in our minds when
yeah.
we see people running around and laughing on a beach, and boy, and then they happen to have a beer in their hand too. But you see that 1,000 times in a month,
Mm,
so those are really hard. And I will say that as it relates to like medical marijuana and recreational marijuana, these are things that there has been a very significant marketing arm to that industry. And
mhm.
and in certain places where that's rolling out, it's I think again, we don't have a counter message to that's of a sustained significant scale. Like when was the
Mhm.
last time you heard a PSA related to alcohol addiction of any sort, right? It was like, this is your brain on drugs, or don't do
Right.
drugs. We're talking about like in the 90s and the 80s.
Mm,
So, those are things that, when we're fighting this immediate gratification element with a very heavy marketing arm to that because it's
mhm,
monetized,
mhm,
it's profit driven, it does make it a significant challenge. Now, what I would say is how to build one's uh, interest and commitment to change is often starts with helping people understand where they ideally want to be and
mhm,
understanding where they are and what it will take to get to where they want to be and how their behaviors now are either helping them get there or taking away from them getting there. And I
mhm.
think that that just cognitive lens is a really important first step in the process,
Yep.
because if they don't make that connection between, wait a second, yeah, that's where I want to be, but this is where I'm at, and these behaviors aren't helping me get there, um, then they're going to just continue with their current behavior. And even
Mhm,
sometimes when they get to the point where they understand their current behavior is not helping them get there, then that's where a lot of the discussion comes in. Well, okay, well, then what would be helpful for you to put in place that would assist with those behaviors that you even agreed aren't going to really help you get to your ultimate goal? So again, it gets
mhm,
back to that sense of purpose and belongingness and
mhm.
being, a little bit deeper issues. But if you can connect all of those together to where they ultimately really want to be, then you got a good chance that they're going to want to make those changes. And that's critical, because I
Mhm.
can't make a change for somebody.
Yes.
That's one of the biggest struggles that we have, in the treatment world is, we can have clinicians, therapists and clinicians and case managers and doctors and nurses that want to help as much as they
Yep.
possibly can and have a lot to offer to that help.
Yep.
And we'll reach that hand out. But if the other person isn't willing to reach back, it's really got to be a team. It's got to be a partnership.
Yes.
And
Yes.
we can't change somebody for themselves. They have to be, willing to take those steps towards change. We know it's not going to be immediate and turning a light switch on or off.
Yep.
It's going to be a process, but we do need the person to be actively engaged in the process and active in their own change.
Yeah, no, that's a great point, and very well said again. You obviously, I'm sure, have a great team of psychiatrists and counselors and psychologists, et cetera, on staff, but their work can't work if somebody's unwilling to put in the work. Or,
Yeah.
no matter how competent, no matter how much research, no matter how much strategy and willingness to execute, if these folks aren't willing to come to, then there won't be an opportunity to heal, to be treated, to recover. So that's and I certainly don't have the answer. Obviously, I'm passionate and biased. I believe Mindful Journey can fill the gap in many regards because we're trying to deploy hope, because I believe that emotion, when you're delivering words, it matters. So making people feel like they belong and like they matter and have something to look forward to and can be inspired and have hope, that can be the driver to the actual tangible execution of treatment and so forth. But I'm not naive. That Mindful Journey is not the end all be all, or whatever other applications that might be out there in our world today, because there's so many. But I was curious from your vantage point if you're seeing other tools as being the catalyst, if you will, to get folks here.
Yeah,
Is
I totally agree. And the word that you used was, hope. Hope is the accelerant. Hope is the critical ingredient without which, nothing else works or really, matters as far as a person's, ongoing wellness. If they don't have hope, they're not going to engage in the activities or the behaviors that are going to really help them propel and move forward. And we, we're living in a time right now where hopelessness is pretty pervasive. I mean, there was,
mm-hmm.
the Surgeon General came out with a report, I think at the beginning of May it was,
Yeah.
and it was on the epidemic of loneliness and isolation in America. And,
Mm-hmm.
talking about, how that is a health epidemic. Loneliness and isolation and hopelessness fits right in there. And actually,
Yeah.
we know that the hallmark symptom for unfortunately people that complete suicide is hopelessness.
Yeah.
Depression, anxiety, but hopelessness is number one. They
Yeah.
they do not see that there's a way out of their current circumstance or
Yes.
even their elongated circumstance. So it seems like a logical decision to get themselves out of that hopeless situation. So
Yes.
boy, talk about the tragedy that befalls hopelessness. And I do think that that's such a critical element of that. Hope is a critical element in behavioral change in any way,
Yes.
and certainly in overall wellness. So I think that was really,
Yes.
really good point.
Yeah, well, no, and it's funny that you mentioned, not funny in a laughable way, but ironic, I guess is the better word choice, that you mentioned what you just did about the Surgeon General's comments, because our guest a few weeks ago brought that up. And then to your mention of folks who complete suicide, not having hope, we had Dr. Drew Pate, who's the chief of psychiatry at LifeBridge Health up in Baltimore, Maryland area. I think he joined us in March, and he basically echoed the same thing you said. And they've got data that supports, right, that the folks that in their region who have completed suicide, not only did they identify in talking with family members, et cetera, that they didn't believe there was a brighter tomorrow, that they were hopeless, but that they also didn't seek any sort of treatment, that there was nothing to be hopeful about. So, I think, Scott, as you're challenging me to think even more so right now with Mindful Journey. How can we reach the masses even in a more intentional way, where we can let them know that there is something on the other side of what is here and now? And I appreciate your thoughts and those comments that you shared. I do want to get. I know we're sensitive on time here. I promised I'll get you out right at 12:59. I I have one more question relative to mental illness, and I want to get just a little bit more about your personal life, to your level of comfort and willingness to open. When you think about the both the serious forms of mental illness, the schizophrenias, the bipolars, and maybe the more treatable through non-drug intervention like a depression or an anxiety in either regard. I'd like to ask the forthcoming question, with both of them at the forefront, is is this something we're destined for from birth? Is our brain's physiology already predetermined that we're going to be anxious, that we're going to be depressed, or that we're going to get schizophrenia? Or can it be brought on by a series of life events that, say, I get divorced, I am facing bankruptcy, I get a physical ailment, and now I just get, is there any data out there that says we're destined for it, or it's actually brought on from birth, or perhaps is it somewhere in between?
Yeah, the way that the data and my experience across all these years, would dictate is we're somewhere in between. I have certainly seen, and there certainly is empirical evidence that there are individuals. Sorry about that. There are individuals who have a genetic predisposition to having a mental illness, and sometimes a serious mental illness. And some of the most significant data that they have is around bipolar disorder, and where they can kind of prove, empirically speaking, that if a person has a parent who has bipolar disorder, they have a greater likelihood of developing bipolar disorder in their lifetime. If they have two parents that have bipolar disorder, that exponentially even further increases their likelihood of developing bipolar disorder. Schizophrenia, depression, anxiety, there are sets of data that would suggest that if a person has those conditions in their family members, their biological parents, grandparents, that there is a greater likelihood that they may have a struggle with those issues. That being said, not everybody does. So there's certainly some variables there that we still don't clearly fully understand, and we're learning more about the brain. We've learned more about the brain in the last 10 years than the 100 or 200 or 1,000 that preceded it. So we're constantly learning more. But I would say that certainly there are life circumstances that can trigger an individual to more likely struggle with a mental health challenge. And there's evidence about early childhood trauma and adverse experiences. There's an ACEs survey that looks at certain markers of experience that someone may have experienced in their lifetime as a child, and looking at those markers of experience, environmental experiences associated with different forms of trauma. It does demonstrate having an impact of likelihood that somebody is going to be struggling with their mental health as a child, adolescent, and if not attended to, further into their adult life. So that's why I would say it's not an either or, it's an and, that we have to be sensitive to. And so the kind of the age-old question is nature versus nurture. And whenever anybody asks me that, I say yes. It's both, and you have to look at all of those elements. And I think the really important point is that however it manifests itself, or for whatever the etiology is of the manifestation, that there's tools and tips and skills building and help and hope for everyone, because we know treatment works, and we talk about it in the term of psychiatric rehabilitation, recovery, because rehabilitation is regaining what was lost. Something was kind of amiss, but we're going to help regain that, and hopefully not only just regain that, but to have a breakthrough to even a whole different level. We actually have somebody on our website that I just love the way that he expressed it. He said, there's a video clip, his name is Blake, and he came through our substance use recovery. And he said, to say that, my life now is as good as it was before, is an understatement. My life is so much more now than I ever imagined for. So
Wow.
it's like, getting back to that homeostasis, but we're not satisfied there. We want to see
Yeah,
thriving, and
that's
so,
amazing.
but I think that that's, kind of the way that I look at the whole nature versus nurture element.
That's amazing. That's very powerful, and I like how much like with you know you shared through the just the pet therapy how it put a smile on people's eyes. I think there's power in stories and power in examples, and this the young man who or maybe not young man. I didn't see Blake's testimonial like I did the woman's, but to hear that he said, "No, I'm better than before." It's that's an amazing testimony and speaks to the work you're doing. I love that. That's and it's true, right? That you mentioned before about mental and physical health. If we, I think you drew in the comparison that if I'm diagnosed with diabetes, I've got to go get insulin, but if I'm diagnosed with bipolar, I resist it. So with the mental health we don't treat it like physical health, but in this example, this I like it because it's in physical health we go to rehab to get stronger, to get better, and
Yeah.
with psychiatric rehab, the same is true. We come out the other side perhaps better than we entered into it. So
Yeah,
amazing.
and no matter where a person kind of comes into the treatment or the care realm, we know the things that you were talking about can help everybody. I mean, whether you have a mental illness or you don't have a mental illness, exercise and diet and nutrition and having pets or art therapy or getting out in the community, having motivational messages and support and encouragement, that helps everybody. I mean, so
Yes.
those are we talk about that when it comes to things like counseling. People say, I don't want to go to a counselor. I'm not, I don't need that, or I don't want that. We say, well, what's wrong with learning, putting a few more tools in your toolbox?
Yeah.
What's wrong with getting some tips that might be able to help you go through a challenging circumstance. We all go through challenging
Yes.
circumstances, and we could all benefit from learning a few more ways of positively coping with that or addressing that. Or what, even if you think that you don't really need that help or support, you might have somebody that comes to you, and then you'll have some additional tools in your tool belt for somebody else. So there's
Yes.
never any harm learning more. Certainly I don't think about learning more about ourselves, so that we can, lead ourselves and help, lead others and support others the best we possibly can in life.
Definitely love that. Well, speaking of taking care of self and going through challenges like you mentioned, we all do. My last question for you, and I'd love to open this up to any listeners. If you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat function. But my last question to you, Scott, before we close, is what's the most challenging thing that you've gone through in your life, and what do you recall having done to get through it? And before I give you a chance to answer, this is to your level of comfort, of course, to your level of willingness to be vulnerable. The intention of this is to let listeners listening in recognize that we all face hardship. Even somebody who, like in your role as a CEO of a 400-person company, folks may look to you and say, well, Scott's perfect, right? He doesn't have any flaws or challenges. And so we're trying to break down the barriers and normalize the fact that we all face hardship and then learn some coping mechanisms. So, with that being said, what is the hardest thing or most challenging thing you've gone through, and what did you do to get through it?
Yeah, sure. Well, it's certainly, yeah, I have several that I could choose from. But I will say, that probably one of them. Well, I actually had two episodes where I went through some depression and anxiety, some significant depression and anxiety myself. This was actually, after I was already in the field for many years. I do have mental health challenges on both sides of my family and addiction challenges on both sides of my family. So certainly something that from an intellectual standpoint, I always understood, could be something that I could be challenged with myself. And
Mhm.
so I think, having probably a genetic predisposition in that regard, and also, being in a field that is really challenging, and has very high levels of burnout, not only from the clinical side of the industry, but then also the challenges, because funding is always a major challenge for behavioral health. Treatment. And so all of those things, got me into a couple of different episodes at a couple different times in my life where I did struggle with some depression and anxiety. And what I did was I kind of said to myself, and this is really hard, I think, even maybe a little bit more so for males than for females, is to kind of say, I need help. I need to get
Mm,
some help, and I need to get some support, because we're kind of supposed to be, especially at that point, as a husband, as a father, we're the ones that are the stoic, just keep moving forward. And
yes.
but it was a opportunity for me to reflect back on all of the different advice that I had given to people across so many years, and said, no, and I need to get some help and support. So
Mm,
so the couple episodes of time that I had been on medications for, fortunately for me, I was able to be on those
mm,
medications for a short period of time, a
mhm,
relatively short period of time, and getting some counseling support. And
mm,
between that care, and then also for me, the constant in my life is my faith, and leaning always heavily on my faith has been
yes.
what's gotten me through every hard time.
Yes. Well, thank you for opening up and sharing so vulnerably, Scott. I think um, we'll all benefit from hearing that, not only because it's just a reminder that cannot be overstated that if you're going through something, it's okay to not be okay, but you've got to be courageous enough and humble enough to admit it. But secondarily, from someone in your shoes who is in this space, I can only imagine what it was like in those moments that you might have feared what others will think of your competency, right?
Sure.
That you're the treater, you are the caregiver, and now the caregiver is needing care himself, and that took a lot of courage, I'm sure, and I'm so grateful that you shared that with us, because it's permission for all of us if we're going through something to say, hey, it's okay to seek treatment. Doesn't mean that we're less than or inadequate, and certainly grateful for those words.
Yeah,
Thank you.
absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. And I do think that's another part of our culture that we need to grapple with, and we need to get a little bit further on, is that by seeking help and support, it's not a sign of weakness, it's a sign of strength. It's a sign of
Yes.
recognizing that there's something that could potentially be assisted to help us get through that, and to build that resiliency and be able to carry on. And
Yeah.
to open up like that, for an individual to seek help and support, we need to culturally be looking at that as a strength, rather
Yes.
than that historical context of a weakness, or somebody seeking help for as a crutch. It really is a sign of strength.
Yes. Yes. Thank you. Well, I don't see any questions, and I promise you 12:59. So I will read you one comment that someone put in. They said, "Love the message on your mug," and I didn't see your mug, so I'd love to. I'd love to see it. What is the message?
The message is right here, and it says, "Love powerfully, live purposefully, and leave the rest to God."
Love it. That's amazing. I love it, Scott. Well, thank you so much. I'm so grateful for our friendship and the relationship that we've been able to grow. Wishing you continued success. Good luck at your next meeting, and I'll follow up with you offline and send you a recording this. But again, so grateful for your engagement today and for your words shared with us. It was very, very meaningful and touching to many, I am sure.
Oh, thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity, and love connecting with you and partnering with you. And I support all that you're doing to bring help and support to those out there, because we could all use more of it. And you hit the nail on the head with hope and encouragement. That's what it's really all about.
Yes. Thank you, Scott. Good to see you. Have a
Thank
great
you.
day.
You too.
Take
Bye
care.
bye.